In the great history of the Warcraft universe, there's been a wide and varied array of MacGuffins, unobtaniums, and Gary stews. I'm looking at you, Ronan. Don't think you've gotten out of your dressing down here. It's happening eventually. Many of these, from Azerite to Shaz to time travel and the infinite dragonflight, as well as Apexis bits from both Burning Crusade and Warlords of Draenor, to the Soul Anima Essence mishmash that everyone was getting starved of in Shadowlands, they've generally felt forced, incomplete, or straight up a negative. There was a time, however, when Blizzard had an idea for one of these concepts that didn't take away from the world, but in fact built it up and added to it. A sentient race of creator demigods that the universe at large had, in ancient times, relied on to order reality. Armies of constructs that fought against the shadow and void to create life and possibility in the universe. At least, that's what they would have been had Blizzard gotten around to finishing any of their storylines or quests before they changed their minds on them. Let's say half a dozen times. Welcome to Ancient Lore, a discussion series where we peel back the layers of world building and story to examine, understand, and discuss where we came from in the World of Warcraft. Today's topic is the Titans, Blizzard's favorite big dumb objects. And as always, if you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them in the comments section below or connect with me on my Discord. Our parameters for this episode are going to be much more specific than usual. I'm including absolutely no novel or comics in this, especially Chronicles. Also, I'm instituting a hard cutoff of Wrath of the Lich King for anything we're considering canon, as Cataclysm and its nonsense was far too hard of a right turn for Titan lore, especially with Uldum. I'm sorry, Uldum was an absolute colossal mess of what could have been an incredible dungeon or raid. The only good part being the Halls of Reorigination instance. Early vanilla to the end of Wrath. That's all we're considering here. Any mentions of Azeroth as a Titan or the occurrences during Legion with Argus and the World Souls will be rapidly ignored, as it's some of the most MacGuffin-y fluff I've ever read in Warcraft lore, right up there, once again, with Ronan and his nonsense. A vast majority of what we know about the Titans began with the dwarves and their excavation, specifically in Uldaman. Not everything, but quite a lot. Let's start with the dwarves and their drive to explore their origins. There's a pair of excavation sites, one in Loch Modan and another just south in the Badlands. Both of them have uncovered evidence of the ancient past of the dwarves, and point players to a third dig site that leads them to the ancient ruins of Uldaman. Contested between dark iron dwarves, vile trogs, as well as earthen and giant constructs, the players are able to fight through them to discover the Discs of Uldaman, or also known as the Platinum Discs. Not only are the discs part of an incredible interaction with a Titan construct, but also through that interaction, we learn some vital details not just about the Titans, but of the dwarves themselves. The first thing that we learn is that both the earthen as well as the larger constructs here are all of Titan creation. Titans, or creators as the Stonekeeper refers to them as, created them as part of their origination of Azeroth, as guardians and workers to do the on-the-ground labor needed to bring order and life to the world. We're also told that the Titans engaged in the seeding or ordering of Azeroth as mentioned, although the Stonekeeper doesn't go into too much detail on this. Finally, we're informed that, for some reason, the Earthen were affected by some form of anomaly that caused them to degenerate into trogs and dwarves, and while the creators see trogs as unacceptable, in part due to their cannibalistic tendencies, dwarves are deemed worthy of their own existence. We receive from the Lorekeeper of Norgannon, the Titan construct we speak to, items called the Platinum Discs. On these giant discs, all the data on the creators, earthen constructs and trogs, and matrix anomalies are recorded on. These are taken to their respective faction cities for study, after which we're sent to a location that's suspected to also be of Titan construction, Uldum. Located on the very southern edge of Tanaris, Uldum is a bit of a head-scratcher as of Vanilla's release in 2004. We as players can bring the discs over, get a little flavor text, and then get sent on our way with an error code that the dwarves and Tauren can't sort out. We can, however, glean some very critical details from the physical location of Uldum and the surroundings of it. A lot of people never looked at the gates themselves long enough, because the details we can distill from it are staggering. The first thing I'm going to point out is the obvious: the giant hole in the middle of it. Something big went through these doors, most likely in direct opposition to why these doors were here in the first place. The next detail is more subtle, but it's the way the doors are bent. I apologize, I couldn't get a great picture of this, but the doors aren't bent inwards, they're bent outwards. This would indicate the giant thing that broke through the door was trying to get out, not get in, which leads directly to the question of what were the Titans trying to contain in there that wanted to get out? Hold on to that. The final point I want to make on this is all the gigantic arrows stuck around the hole in the door in general. There's a lot of them, and it appears whatever firing them was not only trying to keep whatever was trapped inside Uldum inside, but also the beings firing them had to be of construct or Vrykul size, at the minimum, or possibly Roman-style ballista. We can also look at the location of the Uldum facility itself for details. The southern edge of Tanaris has multiple serious Silithid colonies, and while certainly when Uldum was first constructed, the terrain was very different in the area, I think it's safe to assume the Silithid have always had a serious presence in this region of the world based on the Mists of Pandaria map of the Black Empire. Yeah, I know it's past the timestamp of Wrath for this piece, and the Titans in general, but in regards to the old gods' lore, I consider it accurate. We must ask then, what research were the Earthen constructs and Titans doing here, if any? Were they using this location to imprison captured servants of Cthulhu, or possibly developing new ways to fight the old gods? These are important questions we were, at the time, asking about Uldum, and I think they lend some interesting thoughts to the Titans and their greater purpose. With Vanilla Titan lore, there are two other major points we need to bring up. The first is a relatively undocumented location in Darkshore called the Master's Glaive. This location features what can only be described as a gigantic corpse of a monster of the old gods. At least what I might guess is its skull, perhaps. Embedded deep in said skull of said corpse is what I believe is the Master's Glaive itself, an immense glowing Titan-forged sword still active and powered after all these years, illuminating the surrounding forest in southern Darkshore. A relic from the ancient war between the Titan-forged armies and the old gods. The fact that this weapon is still powered says a lot about the longevity of anything the Titans crafted. I'd be afraid to try and remove it, as who knows how unstable such a weapon might react considering how long it's been there. The other thing we can glean from this is the sheer strength and size of the enemies of the Titan Forged. The old gods created some true monstrosities in their time as lords of primordial Azeroth. Understanding the scale of creatures like this corpse represents is integral in understanding the overall opposition that the Titan-forged armies ended up overcoming. The second point I wanted to quickly highlight from Vanilla comes from the many books strewn around the world, specifically the names of the Titans along with a few tidbits of information on them. The names of the Titans are, in no particular order, Agramar, Amonthul, Eonar, Norgannon, Golganeth, Khazgoroth, and Sargeras. Agramar and Sargeras were both, during their times, champions of the Pantheon, although Sargeras fell and became a destroyer, leader of the Burning Legion. Eonar was titled the Lifebinder. We know Norgannon had to do with knowledge and lore. Khazgoroth was integral in the shaping of the physical world, and it's assumed Khazmodan is named as such because of him. And finally, Golganeth had some relation to energy, storms, and seas, although this isn't incredibly clear until later on in Wrath. Speaking of Wrath, it's time to step ahead in time slightly and look at the major expansion that shed a lot more light on the Titan Forged as well as the legacy of the Titans. While I'm not ignoring TBC in any way, there's generally no lore uncovered during it for the Titans, so we don't need to spend time on it. There's two major locations as well as a specific curse we need to review when talking about the Titans in Wrath of the Lich King: the Storm Peaks and Ulduar. While Sholazar Basin is very pretty and all, we learn nearly nothing about the Titans from it, and in general it feels much more like a set piece and prop than a legitimate point of learning. Storm Peaks first. Set up in the mountains over Northrend, here we see Vrykul, storm giants, and all sorts of earthen and iron dwarves living and fighting amongst each other. We also see some of the most incredible and over-the-top Titan-forged construction anywhere we've yet seen, with massive promenades and temples, as well as intense, deep machine systems all constructed throughout the region. The biggest thing about all of this is getting to see the immense scale that the Titans and their creations can work at, with entire mountains just covers for massive and unknowable machines. While, again, this may be just set pieces at times, this feels purposeful, and at times overwhelming, with multiple quests sending you deep into these mechanized sections of the world. Going through this zone, it makes one ask serious questions on what these machines are built to do, what kind of power sources could turn gears the size of ships, and what are the consequences of them grinding to a halt. Ulduar is a whole different kind of beast in this regard, with 4 major points to cover. The first is, we get to see the Titan-forged Guardians of the World, constructs that, after the Titans ordered the world, left to oversee the continued stability of their creations. These constructs were imbued with incredible intelligence and immense power, representing many forces that the Titans themselves also represented. While we need to subdue these beings in Ulduar to help us with our overall task, they all come around to assisting the players. The scale of the Ulduar facility is the next thing I want to touch on. With it being a true facility instead of just a series of ruins and chambers like the Uldaman we got to experience in vanilla. With immense forges, dedicated observation rooms, experimental chambers, and a prison built for our next talking point, this is a place the Titans built with specific purpose in mind and built for the long term as well. Hanging over the whole facility, like an immense ominous shadow, is our third talking point, and the greater purpose for why the Ulduar facility was constructed in the first place: the containing and imprisonment of the old god, Yogg-Saron. While the old god is spread throughout the whole of Northrend with its tendrils and blood, it's in Ulduar that the mind and essence stayed contained for the longest time until its maligned influence corrupted one of the Guardians to release it. This, I believe, is one of the clearest expressions of how much the Titans and their creations feared the old gods, and what lengths they went to in order to stop them from harming Azeroth and its peoples. Finally, the last thing I'd like to touch on in Ulduar is what's considered to be the actual final boss of the raid, and our first encounter with what's called a Constellar. A being called into service by the Titans that's made of the essence of star stuff, Algalon the Observer is dedicated to watching Azeroth and its peoples, and in the instance of the Prime Designate Keeper dying, performing a full analysis of the planet and calling for reorigination if required. While initially finding that the old god's corruption had escalated to an unacceptable point, the players show their mettle and convince it otherwise. Not only does this show that there are beings out in the universe that the Titans can work with, but also that these beings of immense power have access to information of and direct lines of communication with the Titans that we could only speculate on. The information they possess would certainly overwhelm nearly any mortal. Before we get into thoughts and speculation, and maybe a complaint or two, we have one more world-sized problem I want to take a look at very quickly: the infamous Curse of Flesh. While the Curse of Flesh was restricted to Azeroth's creations and worked over a long period of time to corrupt the Earthen, Vrykul, and Constructs, it does tell us a lot of how the Titans create. As much as the Titans can do to order, preserve, and structure worlds in their creations, and as much as they do build to survive the eons, what they make is shown to be corruptible. It may take time, and it may take the work of immensely powerful creatures shown to be the most vile, infectious, and dangerous beings in existence, but it is possible. I am oddly happy with a lot of early Titan lore and world building, finding both Vanilla and Wrath to have done incredibly good jobs of not being too heavy-handed with them, keeping them at arm's distance, but still implying how incredibly important their work has been. The loose threads of Vanilla, while disappointing, also fueled some incredible conversations over the years. When Ulduar came out, and hearing that we may see Uldum open up, many of us were overjoyed to see what lay beneath the southern mountains of Tanaris. Disappointment was by and large everything I experienced in Cataclysm's Uldum, and its incredibly poor writing is one reason I write off anything past Wrath in regards to the Titans. Uldum had so much potential, but creating a sprawling Egyptian-style theme park with writing that lent itself better to a cheap young adult novel than a serious and ancient Titan facility still stings to this day. In regards to the Master's Glaive, mystery still abounds to a certain extent. We eventually find out during the Cataclysm that it's the preserved corpse of Sagoth the Slitherer, an immense servant of the old gods. What we don't learn is how the Titan Forge ended up defeating it originally, and what exactly the adamantine weapon embedded in its skull is from, or how it works. While these loose threads can be frustrating at times, the speculation that came out of semi or unknowns helped the lore and world-building community flourish, creating opportunities for creativity and interpretation. More than anything, I think the lesson to be learned from the early lore of the Titans is that it's okay to not know everything. Much of what I discussed in this piece allows us to ask more questions and gives us an impetus for being curious instead of delirious. While Blizzard left much of the deeper details on the Titans vague or unknown, they did so in a way that gave us a great basis to work off of and say, yes, I want to know more. Let's see if we can figure it out. It's a lesson in not being heavy-handed or over the top that Blizzard quickly forgot or actively did away with almost immediately in Cataclysm. That you can absolutely go too hard in the paint or have too much of something. We close this book of Warcraft history here and save the rest for another time. If you've enjoyed this feature, please consider subscribing here at youtube.com/TheDanNation, as well as joining my Discord at tinyurl.com/DanScord. It's a Discord, but with 100% more Dan. A big thank you to the Turtle WoW community, where most of this visual footage you see during this episode is recorded at, as well as having provided the backing track for this piece. An additional thank you to those of you who have signed up for memberships here on YouTube. Your financial support is greatly appreciated. From the Lore Bunker in Boston, Massachusetts, this is Dan wishing you a wonderful and wide, wide world of lore.